Elena was tired. Not the kind of tired that goes away after a good night of sleep. It was the kind of tired that settles deep into your bones and stays there for months, maybe years. She had been on her feet for almost 10 hours now, carrying plates of expensive food to tables filled with people who barely looked at her face. She worked at a fancy restaurant called the Golden Note in downtown Chicago. It was the kind of place where a single meal could cost more than what Elena made in an entire week. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths covered every table. Soft music played in the background. And in the corner of the main dining hall stood a beautiful grand piano, polished so well that you could see your reflection in it. Every time Elena walked past that piano, something inside her chest would tighten. It was a strange feeling, like seeing an old friend you had to leave behind. She would look at it for just a second, then quickly look away and continue doing her job. Nobody at the restaurant knew her story. To them, she was just another waitress, a quiet woman in her late 20s who always showed up on time, never complained, and did her work without causing any trouble. She kept to herself mostly. During breaks, while other staff members chatted and laughed, Elena would sit alone in the corner of the kitchen, staring at nothing in particular, lost in thoughts that nobody could see. But Elena had not always been this way. There was a time, not so long ago, when her life looked completely different. Growing up, Elena lived in a small town with her parents and 2 younger siblings. Her family was not rich, but they were happy. Her father worked at a local factory, and her mother sold homemade bread and pastries from their tiny kitchen. It was a simple life, but it was filled with love. Elena discovered her gift when she was just 6 years old. Her grandmother had an old piano in her living room. It was out of tune and missing a few keys, but to little Elena, it was the most magical thing she had ever seen. One afternoon, while the adults were busy talking in the other room, Elena climbed onto the bench and pressed a key. The sound that came out made her smile. She pressed another, and another. Within minutes, she was trying to play a melody she had heard on the radio. Her grandmother walked in and froze at the door. She watched in silence as her granddaughter, who had never taken a single music lesson, played a recognizable tune with her tiny fingers. That night, her grandmother told Elena's parents that this child had a gift, a rare and precious gift that should not be ignored. From that day on, music became Elena's whole world. Her parents saved every extra penny they had to pay for piano lessons. It was not easy. There were months when money was so tight that they had to skip meals, but they never stopped believing in their daughter. They saw the way her eyes lit up when she played. They heard the beautiful sounds that came from her fingers. They knew she was special. By the time Elena was 16, she had already won several local competitions. Teachers said she had the potential to become a professional concert pianist. Her technique was excellent, but what set her apart was the emotion in her playing. When Elena played, people felt something. They could not explain it, but they felt it deep in their hearts. At 18, Elena received the news that changed her life. She had been accepted into one of the most respected music conservatories in the country. It was a dream come true. Her whole family cried tears of joy that night. Her father held her tight and whispered in her ear that he was the proudest father in the world. Elena moved to the city to begin her studies. For 3 years, she worked harder than she had ever worked before. She practiced for hours every day until her fingers ached. She studied music theory, history, and composition. She performed in student concerts and received praise from her professors. Everything was going according to plan. She was just a few months away from graduation when everything fell apart. It started with a phone call. Her mother's voice on the other end was shaking. Her father had collapsed at work. The doctors said it was his heart. He needed surgery. And the surgery was expensive, very expensive. The family had no savings left. They had spent everything on Elena's education over the years. Now they were facing a mountain of medical bills with no way to pay them. Elena did not hesitate. She withdrew from the conservatory immediately and returned home. She took the first job she could find to help pay the bills. Then another job. Then another. She worked day and night, sending almost every dollar she earned back to her family. The surgery was successful, and her father survived, but the recovery was slow. The bills kept coming. Her younger siblings still needed support for their own education. Months turned into years. Elena kept telling herself that this was temporary, that she would go back to music someday. But someday never came. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, and slowly, her dream began to fade. She stopped playing piano altogether. It hurt too much. Every time she touched the keys, she was reminded of everything she had lost, everything she had given up. That is how she ended up at the Golden Note. The restaurant paid better than most places, and the tips from wealthy customers helped her send more money home. She learned to smile even when she did not feel like smiling. She learned to be invisible, to move through the dining room like a ghost, serving people who looked right through her. Some nights, after the restaurant closed and everyone went home, Elena would stay behind for a few minutes. She would stand alone in the empty dining hall and look at the grand piano in the corner. Her fingers would twitch at her sides, aching to touch the keys again, but she never did. She would take a deep breath, turn off the lights, and walk out into the cold night. Nobody knew that the quiet waitress who poured their wine and cleared their plates was once a rising star in the world of classical music. Nobody knew about the competitions she had won, the professors who had praised her talent, the dreams she had been forced to abandon. To the guests at the Golden Note, she was nobody. Just another face in the background. Just another person serving their needs. And Elena had accepted this. She had buried her dreams so deep that she almost forgot they existed. Almost, because sometimes, late at night, when she lay alone in her tiny apartment, she could still hear the music in her head, beautiful, haunting melodies that played on and on, reminding her of who she used to be. She had no idea that everything was about to change. That one ordinary evening at the restaurant would turn her whole life upside down. That the people who laughed at her and looked down on her would soon be staring at her in complete shock. And that the piano she had avoided for so long would finally call her back. But on that cold Tuesday evening, as Elena tied her apron and prepared for another long shift, she knew none of this. She simply took a deep breath, put on her practiced smile, and walked out to face another night of being invisible. That Tuesday evening started like any other. The restaurant was busy but not overcrowded. Guests came and went. Orders were taken. Food was served. Elena moved through the dining room with the same quiet efficiency she had developed over 2 years of doing this job. Around 7 in the evening, the manager called all the staff together for a quick meeting in the back. He told them that a special group was coming in tonight, a private birthday celebration for some very important guests. He used the word important 3 times in less than a minute. Elena understood what that meant. Rich people. The kind of people who expected perfection and had no patience for mistakes. The manager assigned Elena to serve their table. She was the most experienced waitress on shift that night, and he trusted her to handle difficult customers. Elena nodded and said nothing. She had dealt with difficult customers before. She could handle it. At exactly 8 o'clock, the group arrived. There were 6 of them in total. 4 women and 2 men. They walked into the restaurant like they owned the place. Expensive clothes, designer bags, jewelry that sparkled under the chandeliers. The kind of people who had never worried about money a single day in their lives. At the center of the group was a woman who appeared to be in her early 40s. She had blonde hair styled perfectly, bright red lipstick, and a dress that probably cost more than Elena's rent for an entire year. Her name was Victoria, and tonight was her birthday. Elena would later learn that Victoria came from old money and had married into even more money. She sat on the boards of several charities, attended galas and fancy events, and was well known in high society circles. From the very first moment, Elena could feel something cold in the air. Victoria looked at her the way someone might look at a piece of furniture. Not with hatred exactly, but with complete indifference. As if Elena was not really a person at all. Elena approached the table with menus and her best professional smile. She greeted them politely and began to explain the evening specials. Before she could finish her second sentence, Victoria held up her hand and cut her off. "We don't need you to read the menu to us. she said. Her voice was sharp and dismissive. Just bring us a bottle of your best champagne. And try not to take forever. Elena felt a small sting in her chest, but she kept her smile in place. Of course, madam. Right away. She returned quickly with the champagne and began to pour. As she filled the glasses, one of Victoria's friends leaned over and whispered something. The whole table burst into laughter. Elena did not hear what was said, but she had a feeling it was about her. She kept her eyes down and finished pouring. The evening continued. And with every passing minute, things got worse. When Elena brought the appetizers, Victoria complained that the plates were too cold. When she brought the main course, Victoria sent her steak back twice, claiming it was not cooked properly. Each time, she spoke to Elena in a tone that made it clear she thought Elena was beneath her. The other guests followed Victoria's lead. They made small comments here and there. One woman laughed at the way Elena pronounced a French dish on the menu. Another made a joke about how waitresses these days probably could not even spell the word service. They did not bother to lower their voices. They wanted Elena to hear. Elena kept her composure. She had dealt with rude customers before. This was nothing new. She reminded herself that she was here to do a job, to earn money for her family. These people did not know her. Their words meant nothing. But then something happened that pushed everything over the edge. Elena was refilling the water glasses when Victoria suddenly stood up to take a phone call. The movement was so quick and unexpected that Elena's hand jerked slightly. A small splash of water landed on the tablecloth, just inches away from Victoria's designer handbag that was sitting on the chair beside her. Victoria ended her call and looked down at the tiny wet spot on the cloth. Then she looked at Elena. Her eyes were cold and hard. What did you just do? She asked, her voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. Elena felt her heart drop. I am so sorry, madam. It was just a small accident. The water did not touch your bag. I promise. Let me get a fresh cloth right away. But Victoria was not interested in solutions. She was interested in making a scene. A small accident, she repeated, her voice rising. Do you have any idea how much this bag costs? It is worth more than you will ever make in your entire miserable life. The restaurant fell silent. Every guest in the room turned to look. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her. Her face burned with embarrassment. But she forced herself to stay calm. I truly apologize, Elena said quietly. It will not happen again. Victoria stepped closer, looking Elena up and down with disgust. People like you should not be allowed to work in places like this. You are clumsy. You are incompetent. You will never amount to anything. Do you understand me? Nothing. The words hit Elena like stones. She stood there, frozen, unable to speak. She wanted to defend herself, to tell this woman that she had no right to speak to anyone this way. But she could not. She needed this job. Her family depended on her. Victoria turned to the manager, who had rushed over at the first sign of trouble. I want her gone from our table immediately. And I expect a significant discount on our bill for this disgraceful experience. The manager apologized over and over again. He grabbed Elena by the arm and pulled her toward the kitchen. Once they were out of sight, his polite expression vanished. What were you thinking? He hissed at her. Do you know who that woman is? She could destroy this restaurant with one bad review. It was an accident, Elena whispered. Her voice was shaking. The water did not even touch her bag. I do not care, the manager snapped. I am docking your pay for tonight. Now stay in the kitchen and keep out of sight until they leave. He walked away without another word. Elena stood alone in the corner of the kitchen, her hands trembling. She could hear the other staff members whispering, glancing at her with a mixture of pity and relief that it had not happened to them. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run out of that restaurant and never come back. But she did none of those things. Instead, she took a deep breath and pressed her palms against the cold metal counter, trying to steady herself. This was her life now. Invisible, powerless, forgotten. She thought about her father lying in that hospital bed years ago. She thought about her younger siblings who were counting on her. She thought about the dreams she had buried so deep that they barely felt real anymore. And she wondered if this was all she would ever be. Just a waitress who gets yelled at by strangers. Just a nobody. Out in the dining room, Victoria and her friends were laughing again. They had already forgotten about Elena. To them, she was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a brief source of entertainment before they moved on to their next glass of champagne. But the universe has a funny way of turning things around. And on this particular night, it was about to give Elena a chance she never expected. A chance that would leave Victoria and everyone else in that restaurant completely speechless. Elena did not know it yet, but her moment was coming. Elena stood in the kitchen for what felt like hours. In reality, it was only about 20 minutes. She kept her head down and tried to stay busy, wiping counters that were already clean, arranging plates that did not need arranging, anything to keep her hands occupied and her mind from wandering back to what had just happened. The other kitchen staff moved around her quietly. A few gave her sympathetic looks, but nobody said anything. They all knew how these things worked. When a rich customer complained, someone had to take the blame. Tonight, that someone was Elena. She could still hear Victoria's voice echoing in her head. "You will never amount to anything." The words played on repeat like a broken record. Elena had heard cruel things before. Working in the service industry, you develop thick skin, but something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the public humiliation. Maybe it was the unfairness of it all. Or maybe it was because, deep down, a small part of Elena feared that Victoria was right. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. She could not afford to fall apart. Not here. Not now. Around 9:30, the kitchen door swung open and the manager rushed in. His face was red, and he looked panicked. Elena instinctively stepped back, expecting another round of criticism. But the manager was not looking at her. He was looking at his phone, and he was clearly upset. "This cannot be happening," he muttered to himself. "Not tonight. Of all nights, not tonight." One of the cooks asked what was wrong. The manager ran a hand through his hair and let out a frustrated groan. "The pianist," he said. "He just called. He is sick and cannot come in. Something about food poisoning. He can barely stand up." Elena felt a strange flutter in her chest at the mention of the piano, but she pushed it down and stayed silent. The manager started pacing back and forth. The Ashford party specifically requested live piano music for the birthday celebration. It was part of the booking. They are paying a fortune for tonight, and now I have no pianist. This is a disaster. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. One after another, he tried to find a replacement. But it was late on a Tuesday night, and every musician he contacted was either unavailable or too far away to arrive in time. With each failed call, the manager grew more desperate. Meanwhile, out in the dining room, Victoria and her guests were finishing their main course. They would be expecting the special birthday performance soon. The plan had been for the pianist to play while the cake was brought out, creating an elegant and memorable moment. Without the music, the whole evening would feel incomplete, and Victoria was not the type of woman who accepted incomplete. The manager ended another call and cursed under his breath. He looked around the kitchen at the staff, desperation in his eyes. "Does anyone here know how to play piano?" he asked. "Anyone at all? Even basic songs? Anything?" The kitchen went quiet. People exchanged awkward glances. A few shook their heads. One of the younger servers laughed nervously and said she could barely play chopsticks with 2 fingers. Elena's heart began to pound. She stared at the floor, willing herself to stay invisible. This was not her moment. She had not touched a piano in over 2 years. She had buried that part of her life. It was too painful to revisit, but the memory came flooding back anyway. The feel of the keys beneath her fingers. The way the music used to flow through her like water. The joy she felt every time she played. For a brief moment, she was not a waitress in a kitchen. She was a young girl sitting at her grandmother's old piano, discovering magic for the first time. The manager was still talking, growing more frantic by the second. There must be someone. Anyone. I will pay extra. I just need someone who can play a few songs without embarrassing us. Elena opened her mouth, then closed it again. What was she thinking? She could not do this. She was out of practice. Her fingers would be stiff and clumsy. She would make a fool of herself in front of the same people who had just humiliated her. It was a terrible idea, but another voice inside her spoke up. A quieter voice. One she had not heard in a long time. What if this is your chance? She thought about Victoria sitting out there, so confident and cruel. She thought about the words that had been thrown at her like knives. You will never amount to anything. And suddenly, something shifted inside Elena. A tiny spark of the person she used to be flickered to life. Before she could talk herself out of it, Elena heard her own voice. I can play. The kitchen went silent. Everyone turned to look at her. The manager blinked, as if he was not sure he had heard correctly. You? He said. You play piano? Elena nodded slowly. Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. I used to. A long time ago. I was trained at a conservatory. The manager stared at her for a long moment. She could see the doubt in his eyes. This was the same waitress he had just scolded. The same woman who had spilled water and caused a scene. And now she was claiming she could save the evening? Are you serious? He asked. Yes, Elena said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I am serious. The manager looked around the kitchen, hoping someone else would volunteer. Someone with credentials he could verify. Someone he could trust. But there was no one else. He was out of options. Fine, he said finally. But if you mess this up, you are done here. Do you understand? I will not give you another chance. Elena nodded. She understood perfectly. The manager led her out of the kitchen and toward the dining room. As they walked, Elena's legs felt weak. What had she done? This was insane. She had not practiced in years. Her hands were rough from carrying heavy plates. She did not even know if she could remember how to play. They reached the entrance to the main dining hall. Elena could see the grand piano sitting in the corner, bathed in soft light. It looked beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Beyond the piano, she could see Victoria's table. They were laughing about something, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Victoria noticed Elena first. Her eyes narrowed, and a smirk spread across her face. She leaned over to one of her friends and whispered something. The whole table turned to look at Elena, amusement written all over their faces. Oh, this is precious, Victoria said loudly, not bothering to hide her mockery. The clumsy waitress is going to play piano for us? This should be entertaining. Her friends laughed. A few other guests in the restaurant looked up, curious to see what was happening. Elena felt her face grow hot. Every instinct told her to turn around and run back to the kitchen. To forget this whole thing and accept that some dreams are not meant to come true. The old Elena, the defeated Elena, would have done exactly that. But something had changed. Maybe it was the humiliation she had endured tonight. Maybe it was the years of buried frustration finally rising to the surface. Or maybe it was simply the sight of that beautiful piano calling out to her after so long. Whatever it was, Elena did not run. Instead, she walked forward. One step at a time. Past the staring guests. Past the whispering staff. Past Victoria. And her table of mocking friends. She walked all the way to the grand piano and stood before it. For a moment, she just looked at it. The polished black surface. The white and black keys waiting in perfect rows. She reached out and touched it gently, almost like greeting an old friend. Then she sat down on the bench. The room was buzzing with whispers and barely contained laughter. She could hear Victoria making another joke. She could feel the doubt coming from every direction. Elena placed her fingers on the keys. They trembled slightly. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first note rang out across the dining room. It was soft and uncertain, like a question being asked in the dark. Elena kept her eyes closed. She could not bear to look at the faces watching her. She could not bear to see their smirks and raised eyebrows. Her fingers felt stiff at first. Foreign. Like they belonged to someone else. For one terrible moment, she thought she had made a horrible mistake. The music felt stuck somewhere deep inside her, refusing to come out. 2 years was a long time. Maybe too long. Maybe the gift she once had was gone forever. But then something shifted. It started slowly. Her fingers found a familiar pattern on the keys. A melody she had played 1,000 times before. It was like muscle memory, waking up from a long sleep. One note followed another, then another. And before Elena knew what was happening, the music began to flow. She had chosen to play Chopin's Ballade. No, 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano. A composition that took most pianists years to master. It was emotional, complex, and demanded complete technical control. It was also the last piece Elena had been preparing before she left the conservatory. The piece she never got to perform. The opening notes filled the room like a gentle wave. Soft and haunting. The kind of melody that makes you stop whatever you are doing and listen. A few guests who had been whispering fell silent. Forks that had been moving toward mouths paused in midair. At Victoria's table, the laughter died down. One of her friends tilted her head, confused. This was not what they had expected. This was not the clumsy fumbling of an amateur. This was something else entirely. Elena kept playing. Her eyes were still closed. She was no longer in the restaurant. She was somewhere else now. Somewhere far away from the cruel words and the judging stares. She was back in her grandmother's living room, a little girl discovering magic. She was in the conservatory practice rooms, working late into the night. She was in all the places where music had been her whole world. The piece built slowly, the way a storm gathers on the horizon. The soft opening gave way to something more powerful. Elena's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with precision and grace. The notes grew stronger, more urgent. The melody swelled and crashed like waves against rocks. By now, the entire restaurant had stopped. Every single person was watching Elena. Waiters stood frozen with plates in their hands. The kitchen staff had gathered at the doorway, peering out in disbelief. Even the manager, who had been so doubtful just minutes ago, stood with his mouth hanging open. This was not just playing. This was something beyond playing. Elena was not simply hitting keys on a piano. She was telling a story of loss and longing, a story of dreams that were stolen and hearts that were broken, a story of hope that refuses to die no matter how hard life tries to crush it. The music filled every corner of the room. It wrapped around the guests like an invisible blanket. Some people leaned forward in their seats, completely captivated. Others sat back with their eyes closed, letting the sound wash over them. A woman at a nearby table pressed her hand to her chest, as if the music had physically touched her heart. At Victoria's table, something strange was happening. The smirk on Victoria's face had disappeared. In its place was an expression she rarely wore: uncertainty. Her friends had stopped whispering. They were staring at Elena with wide eyes, unable to look away. One of the men at the table, Victoria's husband, set down his wine glass and shook his head slowly. "My God," he murmured. "Where did she learn to play like that?" Victoria said nothing. For the first time all evening, she had no words. Elena moved into the most demanding part of the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys at incredible speed, yet every note was clean and precise. The technical difficulty of what she was playing would have challenged even professional concert pianists. But Elena made it look effortless, natural, like the piano was simply an extension of her own body. The emotion in the music deepened. There was a passage in the middle of the piece that had always made Elena cry when she practiced it years ago. It was the part that spoke of loss, of saying goodbye to something precious. As she played it now, she thought of everything she had given up: her education, her career, her dreams, all sacrificed so her family could survive. A tear rolled down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. She just kept playing. In the audience, she was not the only one crying. An older gentleman near the window removed his glasses and dabbed at his eyes with a napkin. A young couple held hands tightly, moved by something they could not explain. Even some of the staff members watching from the kitchen doorway had tears streaming down their faces. The piece moved toward its final section. The storm that had been building reached its peak. Elena played with everything she had. All the pain of the past 2 years. All the frustration of being invisible. All the love she still carried for the music that had once been her whole life. She poured it all into the piano, and the piano sang it back to the world. And then, slowly, the storm began to calm. The thundering chords gave way to something softer. The melody returned, but transformed now. What had started as a question in the dark was now an answer, a statement, a declaration that beauty can survive even the darkest nights. The final notes hung in the air like stars appearing one by one in a clearing sky. Soft, gentle, perfect. Elena played the last chord and let it fade into silence. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, not wanting to let go. Then she slowly opened her eyes. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The restaurant was completely still. It was as if time itself had paused to catch its breath. Then the applause began. It started with one person, then two. Then suddenly the entire room exploded into sound. People rose from their seats, clapping and cheering. The applause was loud and genuine, the kind that comes from the heart and cannot be faked. "Brava!" someone shouted. "Brava!" The older gentleman who had been crying stood up and bowed his head toward Elena in respect. The young couple clapped so hard, their hands must have hurt. Waiters who had forgotten they were holding plates set them down just so they could join in. Elena sat at the piano, overwhelmed. She did not know what to do. She had expected mockery. She had expected failure. She had not expected this. She looked over at Victoria's table. The woman who had called her incompetent and worthless just an hour ago was sitting completely still. Her face was pale. Her eyes were fixed on Elena with an expression that was hard to read. It might have been shock. It might have been shame. Whatever it was, the cruel confidence she had worn all evening was gone. Victoria's friends were applauding along with everyone else. Her husband was shaking his head in amazement, still clapping. But Victoria herself did not clap. She just sat there, staring at the waitress she had dismissed as nothing. The manager rushed over to Elena, his earlier frustration completely forgotten. He was grinning from ear to ear, pumping her hand and thanking her over and over again. Other staff members surrounded her, patting her on the back and telling her how incredible she was. But Elena barely heard any of it. She was still sitting at the piano, looking down at the keys that had just changed everything. Tears were still wet on her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of sadness. She had forgotten what this felt like. The joy of playing, the connection with something bigger than herself, the knowledge that she had just shared a piece of her soul with strangers, and they had received it with open hearts. For 2 years, she had believed that this part of her was dead, that the girl who once dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations had been buried under bills and responsibilities and broken hopes. But she had been wrong. That girl was still there. She had been waiting all along, and now, the whole world knew it too. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Elena finally stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky and her heart still pounding. She did not know where to look or what to do with her hands. This kind of attention felt strange after 2 years of being invisible. Guests kept approaching her, shaking her hand, telling her how moved they were. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes held Elena's hands in hers and said it was the most beautiful thing she had heard in 50 years. A young man asked if she had any recordings he could listen to. A little girl who had been dining with her parents tugged at Elena's apron and asked if she was famous. Elena smiled and thanked each person, still feeling like she was floating in a dream. None of this felt real. Then she noticed a man walking toward her. He had been sitting alone at a small table near the back of the restaurant. She had not paid attention to him earlier. He was dressed simply in a dark jacket and glasses, with gray hair at his temples and a calm, thoughtful expression on his face. He waited patiently until the crowd around Elena thinned out a little. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. "That was extraordinary," he said. His voice was warm but serious. "Truly extraordinary. I have heard that piece performed by some of the best pianists in the world. And what you just did rivals any of them." Elena shook his hand, unsure how to respond. "Thank you. That is very kind of you to say." The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small business card. He handed it to Elena. She looked down and read the name printed on it. Her breath caught in her throat. The man was Richard Cole. Even after 2 years away from the music world, Elena recognized that name. He was one of the most respected music producers in the country. He had launched the careers of dozens of classical musicians. He was known for discovering hidden talent and turning unknown artists into international stars. "I don't understand," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Richard smiled gently. "Having dinner, like everyone else. I come here sometimes when I want a quiet evening. I certainly was not expecting to witness something like this." He paused and looked at her carefully. "May I ask you something? Why is someone with your talent working as a waitress?" The question hit Elena like a wave. She did not know how to answer. How could she explain everything that had happened? The sacrifices, the bills, the dreams she had to abandon. It was too much to put into words, but Richard seemed to understand without needing the full story. He nodded slowly, as if he had seen this kind of thing before. "Life has a way of getting in the way of talent," he said. "I have seen it happen too many times. But talent like yours does not disappear. It waits. And tonight, it came back." He told Elena that he wanted to help her. He had connections at the conservatory where she had once studied. He could arrange for her to complete her education, fully sponsored. More than that, he wanted to help her build a career. He believed she had the potential to perform on the world's greatest stages. Elena listened, unable to believe what she was hearing. Things like this did not happen in real life. Not to people like her. Not to waitresses who got yelled at for spilling water. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." Richard looked at her with a seriousness that made her pay attention. "Because I have spent my whole life searching for moments like the one I just witnessed. True artistry is rare. When you find it, you do not let it slip away." He paused. "The question is not why I would do this. The question is whether you are ready to take this chance." Before Elena could answer, she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. Victoria was walking toward her. The confident, mocking woman from earlier was gone. In her place was someone who looked smaller, somehow. Quieter. Her friends remained at the table, watching from a distance. Victoria stopped a few feet away from Elena. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just stood there, as if searching for the right words. "I owe you an apology," Victoria finally said. Her voice was softer than it had been all night. "What I said to you earlier was cruel and unfair. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I was wrong." Elena studied Victoria's face. The apology seemed genuine. There was no trace of the arrogance that had been there before. Just a woman confronting the fact that she had treated another human being badly. "Thank you," Elena said simply. She did not say it was okay, because it was not okay. But she accepted the apology for what it was, a small acknowledgement that words have weight, and that even people who seem untouchable can recognize when they have crossed a line. Victoria nodded once, then turned and walked back to her table. She did not look back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Elena exchanged information with Richard and agreed to meet with him later that week. The manager, who had threatened to fire her just hours ago, suddenly could not stop praising her. He offered her a raise, better shifts, anything she wanted. Elena thanked him politely but made no promises. When she finally left the restaurant that night, the cold air hit her face and she realized she was smiling. A real smile. The kind she had not felt in years. Everything moved quickly after that. Richard kept his word. Within a month, Elena was back at the conservatory, completing the studies she had been forced to abandon. The school welcomed her return with open arms. Her old professors remembered her and were thrilled to have her back. She practiced harder than ever before. Every morning, every evening, every spare moment she had. Her fingers grew strong again. The music that had been sleeping inside her woke up completely, more powerful than before. The pain she had experienced over the past 2 years had not destroyed her gift. It had deepened it, given it new layers of emotion and meaning. 11 months later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City. She was about to perform her debut concert. The auditorium was packed with people who had come to hear the pianist everyone was talking about. The young woman with the incredible story, the waitress who had stunned a room full of strangers and earned a second chance at her dreams. Elena peeked through the curtain at the sea of faces. Somewhere out there, her family was sitting in the front row. Her father, healthy now, and beaming with pride. Her mother, already crying before a single note had been played. Her younger siblings, all grown up, cheering her on. Richard was there too, sitting near the back, watching quietly like he always did. Elena took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling slightly, but it was not fear. It was excitement, anticipation, the feeling of standing on the edge of something beautiful. She walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright, the applause was warm, and the piano was waiting for her like an old friend. Before she sat down, Elena looked out at the audience and spoke into the microphone. "I want to dedicate this performance to my father, who taught me that love means sacrifice, to my mother, who never stopped believing in me, and to everyone who has ever been told they would never amount to anything." She paused, her voice steady and clear. "This is for you. Never give up on your dreams." Then she sat down at the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The music filled Carnegie Hall like sunlight flooding through an open window. And somewhere in that sound was the story of a waitress who had been mocked, dismissed, and forgotten. A woman who had lost everything and found it again. A dreamer who refused to let her light go out. She had been told she was nothing. Tonight, she proved she was everything.